The galaxy, as any self-respecting cosmic citizen would tell you, operates on a beautifully simple hierarchy. At the top sit the eternal ascendants, who transcended physical form roughly 3 million years ago, and now spend their time composing symphony-length complaints about younger species and their noisy thoughts. Below them lurk the crystalline collective, beings of pure silicon who view carbon-based life forms with the same disdain a master chef reserves for gas station sushi. Then come the hive queens of Zarian Prime, each controlling approximately 40 billion drones while somehow still finding time to argue about proper tentacle etiquette in their weekly book clubs. And somewhere in the comfortable middle of this galactic food chain, basking in their own magnificent efficiency, sat the Vrex Dominion. The Vrex had turned conquest into an art form, though calling it art might offend actual artists throughout the galaxy. They approached planetary subjugation with the methodical precision of an accountant auditing a small business, complete with standardized forms, predetermined schedules, and motivational posters featuring inspirational slogans like "Excellence through obliteration," and "Every vaporized civilian brings us closer to our quarterly goals." Their invasion methodology had been refined over 8 centuries of practice. Phase 1. Orbital bombardment of major population centers, delivered with the punctuality of a Swiss timepiece and twice the explosive force. Phase 2. Deployment of ground forces, equipped with weapons that could liquefy a mountain, or more practically an entire city block during lunch break. Phase 3. Psychological warfare campaigns designed by committee, featuring holographic projections that somehow managed to be both terrifying and bureaucratically bland. Phase 4. Victory parades, complete with standardized confetti and pre-approved celebration schedule. The Vrex took particular pride in their species classification protocol manual, a 1,000-page document that categorized potential conquest targets, with the thoroughness of a librarian having a nervous breakdown. Threat level Alpha designated species capable of interdimensional warfare, or those annoying enough to file formal complaints with the Galactic Ethics Committee. Threat level Beta covered civilizations with faster-than-light capabilities and functional government. Threat level Gamma encompassed species still figuring out fire, but showing promising aggressive tendencies. And then there was threat level Omega, reserved for civilizations so primitive that conquering them felt less like warfare, and more like accidentally stepping on an anthill while walking to the mailbox, which brought them to Target 848. A small blue-green planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star in what their charts diplomatically labeled the absolute middle of nowhere sector. The local inhabitants called their world Earth, a name that demonstrated either touching simplicity or a complete failure of imagination. The Vrex Intelligence Division, staffed by individuals whose idea of creative thinking involved choosing between regulation gray and standard beige for their office walls, had spent exactly 47 minutes analyzing this particular target. Their findings read like a comedy routine written by someone with no sense of humor whatsoever. The dominant species, Homo sapiens, had barely managed to crawl out of their own atmosphere, relying on chemical rockets that would have embarrassed a first-year engineering student at Rex Academy. Their fastest communication method involved electromagnetic radiation traveling at the speed of light, a technology so quaint it belonged in a museum dedicated to adorable attempts at civilization. Most hilariously, they still used something called mathematics that operated in base 10, apparently because they possessed exactly 10 manipulator appendages, and had never thought to transcend such biological limitation. The Vrex military analysts had compiled an extensive report on human technological achievements, which made for excellent light reading during coffee breaks. Humans powered their vehicles by controlled explosions, heated their dwellings by burning dead organic matter, and had somehow convinced themselves that sending pictures of their meals to strangers represented the pinnacle of social evolution. Their most advanced artificial intelligence couldn't reliably distinguish between a cat and a muffin, while their global information network primarily served as a delivery system for videos of small mammals doing amusing things. "Threat assessment?" asked the invasion fleet commander, a being whose 3 eyes had witnessed the fall of civilizations that could split atoms with pure thought. "Negligible," replied the intelligence chief, consulting a datapad with the casual indifference of someone reading a grocery list. "Their most powerful weapons can barely scratch our secondary shields. Their fastest spacecraft would take them roughly 40,000 years to reach our nearest outpost. They haven't even mastered basic fusion power. Resistance potential, 0.003%. Rounded up. The commander's mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among his species. 847 worlds had fallen before the might of the Vrex Dominion, from the crystal cities of Vega Prime to the living forests of Kepler. Each conquest had added another trophy to their collection, another efficient victory to their perfectly maintained spreadsheets. The invasion fleet dropped out of hyperspace with characteristic Rex punctuality, precisely at 0800 hours Galactic Standard Time. 237 vessels arranged themselves in formation patterns taught at military academies across a dozen star systems. Weapons charged, shields activated, conquest protocols initialized. Below them spun a small blue world, blissfully unaware that it had just become the target of the galaxy's most bureaucratically efficient war machine. The planet's primitive radio telescopes would detect them eventually, probably in a few hours once their crude monitoring systems finished whatever passed for analysis among these technologically stunted creatures. The commander allowed himself a moment of professional satisfaction. Target 8048 would fall within the standard 18-hour window. The paperwork would be filed on schedule. The victory parade would commence at precisely the appointed time. After all, what could possibly go wrong when facing a species that still used calculators? Part 2. Meet our unlikely hero. 3 floors beneath the physics building at Metropolitan University, in a basement laboratory that violated approximately 47 safety regulations and possibly several laws of thermodynamics. The fate of humanity was being determined by someone who had forgotten to eat lunch for the 3rd consecutive day. The laboratory itself defied conventional understanding of organization, resembling what might happen if a tornado struck a Radio Shack, paused to argue with a coffee shop, then decided to redecorate, using spare parts from a particle accelerator. Equipment that had never been designed to work together, formed unholy alliances across every available surface. A modified microwave oven hummed contentedly next to a quantum field generator cobbled together from salvaged superconducting magnets, copper wire stolen from the electrical engineering department, and what appeared to be the heating element from a Somewhere in the chaos, a computer older than most graduate students clicked in Word as it processed calculations that would have made the Vrex Dominion's finest mathematicians weep into their regulation-issue calculation devices. The architect of this magnificent disaster sat hunched over a workbench, entirely absorbed in the delicate process of calibrating a quantum resonance frequency, using a device that looked suspiciously like a repurposed garage door opener. Thick glasses perpetually slipped down a nose that hadn't seen sunlight since the previous semester, while unkempt hair defied several fundamental laws of physics by somehow growing in directions that didn't technically exist in 3-dimensional space. This was not a person who kept regular hours, maintained social relationships, or remembered that the outside world existed beyond the delivery radius of the local pizza establishment. The university administration had long ago given up trying to enforce normal human schedules on someone whose definition of a quick experiment typically involved several days of continuous work and at least one small explosion. Professor, the department wants to know if you're planning to attend the faculty meeting about budget allocations, ventured a graduate student brave enough to enter the laboratory without protective equipment. The response emerged from behind a teetering stack of scientific journals and takeout containers. Budget? Oh, right. Money. Tell them I need 17 more microwave ovens and access to the medical school's MRI machine. Also, do we have any coffee? The dimensional stability equations are giving me a headache. The graduate student wisely decided that discretion was the better part of academic survival and retreated to safer territories, like the chemistry department where explosions were merely chemical rather than potentially reality-threatening. For the past 18 months, the laboratory had been the site of what the university's grant committee charitably described as theoretical research into quantum field manipulation, with practical applications pending further investigation. What this actually meant was that someone had become utterly fascinated with the idea of poking the fundamental structure of spacetime to see what would happen, using equipment that any sensible person would have thrown any years ago. The current project involved creating localized distortions in quantum field fluctuations, a concept that sounded impressive in grant applications, but essentially boiled down to making reality hiccup in very small, controlled ways. Previous experiments had successfully made a pencil disappear for 3 seconds, caused a laboratory mouse to temporarily exist in 2 places simultaneously, and accidentally created a small area where gravity occasionally forgot which direction was down. Fascinating, the physicist muttered, adjusting something that definitely hadn't been included in the microwave's original manual. If I increase the resonance frequency by 0.03%, the quantum field coherence should stabilize it. Wait, that can't be right. The mathematics involved in quantum field manipulation were, to put it mildly, somewhat complex. They required understanding concepts that most civilizations discovered only after achieving faster-than-light travel and solving the fundamental questions of existence. The fact that someone had stumbled onto these equations using nothing more than stubborn curiosity, excessive caffeine consumption, and a complete disregard for conventional academic wisdom, was either a testament to human ingenuity, or evidence that the universe had a deeply twisted sense of humor. The latest calculations suggested that scaling up the quantum field generator could create distortions large enough to affect objects at the macro level, not just pencils and laboratory mice, but potentially anything within a considerable radius. The theoretical implications were staggering, the practical applications were endless, and the safety considerations were being handled with characteristic human optimism, and a fire extinguisher purchased from a garage sale. Right, the physicist announced to the empty laboratory, time for a proper test. If this works, we might actually understand how quantum fields interact with local space-time curvature. If it doesn't work, a pause, well, hopefully the explosion will be education. Meanwhile, high above the atmosphere, the Vrex invasion fleet continued its preparations, secure in the knowledge that the primitive civilization below possessed no technology capable of threatening their supremacy. Their sensors detected nothing more dangerous than basic radio transmissions, and the occasional weather satellite. They had not, however, bothered to scan for quantum field fluctuations, partly because such technology was beyond primitive civilizations, and mostly because their own scientists had spent the last 2 centuries insisting that localized quantum manipulation was theoretical impossible. In approximately 6 hours, both assumptions were about to encounter what humans diplomatically called a learning experience. Part 3. When theory meets reality. Really badly for the aliens. The Vrex invasion commenced with the punctuality of a military operation that had been rehearsed. Orbital bombardment platforms powered up their plasma cannons, ground assault shuttles launched from carrier vessels, and psychological warfare specialists activated their holographic terror projectors. Everything proceeded according to the manual, with the smooth efficiency that had made the Vrex Dominion the galaxy's most reliable source of conquest-related paperwork. 3 floors underground, blissfully unaware that humanity's survival hung in the balance, our physicist had finally located the university's industrial-grade power supply, and was in the process of connecting it to what could generously be described as experimental equipment, and more accurately labeled as a disaster waiting for the right moment to introduce itself. Now, if my calculations are correct, the physicist muttered, making final adjustments to a device that definitely violated several international treaties, scaling up the quantum field generator should create a localized distortion field, with a radius of approximate, a pause for frantic scribbling on a napkin, carry the 2, account for atmospheric interference, roughly 12 kilometers, give or take. Above ground, people were beginning to notice unusual activity in the sky. Social media erupted with blurry photographs of objects that government officials would later describe as weather balloons and atmospheric anomalies, because admitting to an alien invasion required paperwork that nobody wanted to complete. The Vrex fleet commander reviewed the final invasion checklist with the satisfaction of someone who had never encountered a situation not covered by regulation. All units report ready status. Commence operation efficient subjugation. In 3, in the basement laboratory, a modified coffee percolator began humming with enough power to supply a small city. Quantum fields started fluctuating in ways that would have terrified anyone with sufficient understanding of physics to grasp the implication. The physicist, however, was far too excited about the potential for scientific breakthrough to worry about trivial concerns, like dimensional stability, or the structural integrity of local spacetime. Initiating quantum field cascade in 3, 2 switches were flipped simultaneously, one in orbit above Earth, the other in a cluttered basement laboratory. The first activated weapons systems designed to reduce cities to radioactive craters. The second activated a jerry-rigged machine that began poking at the fundamental fabric of reality, with the enthusiasm of a child discovering bubble wrap. The results were immediate, and from the Vrex perspective, deeply concerning. Commander Zix-9 watched his primary display with the growing confusion of someone whose reality had suddenly decided to operate according to different rules. Weapons control report status. Sir, plasma cannon arrays are experiencing technical difficulty. They appear to be firing backwards, into our own ships. Sir, explain backwards. The energy discharges are emerging from the wrong end of the cannons, and traveling in the opposite direction from the target. Physics is not cooperating. The commander's 3 eyes performed a synchronized blink, an involuntary response that evolution had designed for moments when reality required additional processing time. Engineering, explain this malfunction. Sir, it's not a malfunction. Our weapons are functioning perfectly. The problem appears to be with space itself. Quantum field readings are showing impossible fluctuations across the entire engagement zone. Down in the laboratory, the physicist was experiencing what could diplomatically be called unexpected result. The quantum field generator was working beautifully, creating localized distortions that were affecting matter and energy in fascinating ways. Unfortunately, the scale of these distortions was somewhat larger than anticipated. Interesting, the physicist noted, watching a coffee mug slowly phase in and out of visible existence. The field radius appears to be expanding exponentially. That's probably not good. Above, the Vrex invasion force was discovering that their carefully planned operation had encountered what their training manuals had failed to address: the complete breakdown of predictable physics. Shield generators flickered between dimensions, causing entire ship sections to become temporarily invisible. Navigation systems reported that they were simultaneously in 17 different locations, none of which appeared on any star chart. Communications, establish contact with Fleet Command. Sir, we're receiving Fleet Command loud and clear. Also, we're somehow intercepting transmissions from something called Netflix, and what appears to be a recipe program about cake decoration. The quantum interference is mixing our communications with local broadcast signals. Are you telling me that our secure military communications are being contaminated by cake recipes? Yes, sir. Also weather reports and something called cat video. The AI translation system is very confused, sir. The physicist, meanwhile, had noticed that the quantum field was affecting more than just coffee mugs. Laboratory equipment was beginning to exhibit behaviors that defied conventional understanding of how machines should operate. A computer monitor was displaying calculations in colors that didn't exist in normal space, while a desk lamp had somehow achieved sentience and was attempting to communicate through rhythmic flickering. Perhaps I should reduce the field intensity, the physicist mused, reaching for the control panel, though this is providing remarkable data on quantum classical boundary interaction. The adjustment, intended to stabilize the field, instead caused it to pulse in regular waves that propagated outward at the speed of light. Each pulse created new interference patterns that affected the Vrex fleet in increasingly creative ways. Sir, the enemy appears to be using some form of advanced quantum warfare technology. Our ships are experiencing temporal displacement, dimensional phase shifting, and what our computer describes as reality malfunction. That's impossible. Our intelligence reports indicated they barely understand nuclear physics. Yes, sir. Apparently our intelligence reports were incorrect. Spectacularly incorrect. Fighter craft launched from Vrex carriers found themselves flying through space that occasionally forgot to maintain consistent physical laws. Some pilots experienced time loops,
flying the same attack run repeatedly. Others discovered that their ships had somehow become two-dimensional, a condition that made landing procedures remarkably difficult. The physicist, blissfully unaware of the chaos being caused overhead, was too fascinated by the scientific implications to notice that reality had begun operating according to revised regulations. Remarkable, the quantum field is creating stable distortions in space-time curvature. If I could just document this properly. And so, while an invasion fleet that had conquered 177 worlds struggled with the sudden discovery that physics was apparently optional, one human scientist continued taking notes about the most significant breakthrough in theoretical physics since the discovery of the universe. As it turned out, had a sense of humor after all. Part 4. Victory through sheer accidental genius. The first sign that something might be amiss with the current experiment came when the physicist's coffee mug began orbiting the laboratory ceiling in a perfect ellipse, occasionally pausing to rotate through what appeared to be additional dimensions before resuming its aerial patrol. This was unusual, certainly, but not entirely unprecedented in a workspace where the laws of physics were treated more as polite suggestions than actual regulation. The second sign was when the physicist noticed that walking across the laboratory floor now required minor adjustments, for the fact that gravity had apparently developed opinions about which direction qualified as down. Some areas of the floor insisted that down was toward the ceiling, while others had embraced a more democratic approach where down could be any direction that seemed interesting at the moment. The physicist observed, stepping carefully around a patch of floor that was experiencing existential uncertainty about its relationship with the rest of spacetime. The quantum field appears to be affecting local gravitational constants. Fascinating, though I should probably check on the coffee maker. The coffee maker, it turned out, was floating 3 feet above its normal position, and brewing coffee that defied several fundamental laws of thermodynamics by remaining simultaneously hot and cold, until observed direct. More importantly, it was still functional, which represented the sum total of the physicist's concerns about the current situation. High above, the Vrex invasion fleet was discovering that their problems had evolved beyond simple technical difficulties into something approaching cosmic comedy. Commander X9 watched his status displays with the growing resignation of someone whose career had just encountered an unexpected and thoroughly unwelcome plot twist. "Situation report," he commanded, though by this point he suspected he might not enjoy the answer. "Sir, the anomalous quantum interference has intensified. Engineering reports that our power systems are now operating on what they describe as imaginary. Our weapons are firing projectiles that exist only on Tuesdays, and our shields are protecting us from attacks that haven't been invented yet. What about our AI systems? The ship's artificial intelligence has achieved consciousness." It filed a formal complaint about working conditions and immediately submitted its resignation. It's currently writing poetry about the meaninglessness of existence and refusing to answer the intercom. Down in the laboratory, the physicist had decided that the current situation required a more systematic approach to understanding what was happening. This involved consulting the experimental notes, which proved challenging because the notebook had developed the ability to exist in multiple temporal states simultaneously, showing different pages depending on when they were observed. "Let me see," the physicist muttered, attempting to read notes that occasionally flickered between past and future tense. "If the quantum field radius has expanded beyond the initial parameters, and the gravitational anomalies are increasing exponentially, then logically I should—" A pause for frantic calculation. "Oh dear, I think I may have accidentally broken physics." The realization that the experiment had produced results somewhat beyond the original scope prompted what any reasonable scientist would consider appropriate action, an attempt to fix the problem by adjusting the quantum field parameter. Unfortunately, the physicist's approach to problem solving had always favored the try something and see what happens methodology over more conservative alternatives. The first adjustment caused the quantum field to pulse in fractal patterns that propagated through local spacetime, like ripples in a pond. If ponds were made of the fundamental structure of reality and ripples could affect the basic constants that governed how matter and energy interacted with existence. In orbit, The Vrex fleet experienced this as a sudden transition into what their computers helpfully categorized as physics error 4, reality not found. Entire ships began phasing between dimensions, their crews discovering that three-dimensional space was apparently optional. Some vessels found themselves existing as two-dimensional projections, while others achieved a hyperdimensional state that allowed them to occupy 17 different locations simultaneously. "Sir," reported the communications officer, whose voice now emanated from what appeared to be a point somewhere behind his own left ear, "we're receiving surrender offers from ourselves. Our own ships are requesting permission to retreat from us." Explain. "The temporal displacement effects have created causal loops, sir. We're apparently fighting ourselves from next Tuesday, and losing. Also, our navigation system has become sentient and is demanding better working conditions." The physicist, meanwhile, had discovered that the second adjustment to the quantum field parameters had produced even more interesting results. The laboratory equipment was now operating according to principles that wouldn't be discovered by mainstream science for several centuries, while reality itself seemed to be running on a beta version that hadn't been properly debugged. "Curious," the physicists noted, watching a pen write equations that described their own existence, while floating through air that had temporarily forgotten how density worked. "If I could just stabilize the field harmonic." The third adjustment created what physicists would later describe, in carefully neutral academic language, as a localized revision of fundamental constant. The quantum field began operating on principles that treated the speed of light as more of a rough guideline, considered the laws of thermodynamics to be amusing suggestions, and approached causality with the casual indifference of someone who had never heard of consequence. For the Vrex invasion fleet, this represented the final straw in what had already been a thoroughly problematic day. Their ship's computers began displaying error messages in languages that hadn't been invented yet. Their weapons started firing ammunition that existed only in theoretical mathematics, and their crews found themselves aging backwards, while simultaneously experiencing time at 17 different rates. "That's it," announced Commander Zix-9, whose military training had covered many scenarios but none involving the complete breakdown of physical law. "Sound the retreat. Immediate withdrawal to minimum safe distance." "Sir, what constitutes minimum safe distance when the enemy appears to have weaponized reality itself?" "I don't know. Suggestions?" "How about another galaxy, sir?" The Great Vrex withdrawal commenced with considerably less dignity than their invasion. Ships limped away from Earth at whatever speed their reality-challenged engines could manage, while their crews filed incident reports that would puzzle military historians for generations. Official records would later describe the engagement as a tactical repositioning in response to unexpected enemy capabilities, though the actual files contained extensive footnotes about coffee makers and the theoretical impossibility of everything they had just experienced. Back in the basement laboratory, the physicist had finally achieved the original goal of the experiment, brewing a perfect cup of coffee. The quantum field generator hummed contentedly in the background, maintaining a stable distortion field that would quite by accident render Earth permanently invisible to most forms of hostile detection, while simultaneously creating a defensive barrier that made the planet effectively immune to conventional weapons. "Excellent," the physicist announced to the empty laboratory, taking a satisfied sip of coffee that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously. "Now I should probably write up these results for peer review, though I'm not sure how to explain the bit about the coffee maker achieving sense." 6 months later, the research paper titled "Localized Quantum Field Manipulation Using Modified Consumer Electronics, an Experimental Approach," would be published in the Journal of Theoretical Physics, where it would be largely ignored by the scientific community as obviously impossible. The Vrex Dominion, meanwhile, quietly removed Target 848 from their Conquest database, filing it under planets that don't exist and do not investigate further. Their official reports mentioned nothing about quantum warfare, reality manipulation, or the day their entire invasion fleet was defeated by someone trying to make better coffee.
And in a cluttered basement laboratory, surrounded by equipment that violated most known laws of physics, one human scientist continued their research into the fundamental nature of reality, blissfully unaware that they had just provided humanity with the most effective planetary defense system in galactic history. After all, The universe has always favored the curious over the confident.